Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otesla.
Otesla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otesla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otesla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otesla. Call 1-844-4-OTESLA or visit Otesla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
At the UPS Store, we know things can get busy this upcoming holiday. You can count on us to be open and ready to help with any packing and shipping or anything else you might need.
Is there anything you can't do?
Actually, I don't have a good singing voice. The UPS... Nope. But our certified packing experts can pack and ship just about anything.
At least that's good.
The UPS Store. Be unstoppable. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. Come in today to get your holiday goodies there on time.
The second week of the Canadian election is behind us. The third week of this 5-week campaign lays ahead. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. I'm Brian Lilly, your host. And for the duration of this campaign, we will be bringing you highlights of the campaign and speaking to our great roster of post-media reporters, columnists, analysts for their take on how the campaign's going. This week, I'm joined once again by Stuart Thompson, Ottawa Bureau Chief for National Post, who is on the road with the Liberal campaign, and columnist Tasha Kiridan. They put together the Political Hack newsletter, by the way, so if you want the inside scoop, make sure you're subscribing to Political Hack. Now, due to the nature of campaigns, we couldn't speak to both of them at the same time, but you'll still get to hear both of them and their great analysis. But first, let's set the table. The man who dominated the first week of the campaign, American President Donald Trump, he was a little bit less dominant this week, but still a player. With his big Liberation Day tariff announcement last Wednesday, Trump gave Liberal leader Mark Carney the chance to do what he likes best. Go stand behind a podium on Parliament Hill and act all prime ministerial.
Yesterday marked the latest in President Trump's unprecedented series of U.S. tariffs that are designed to reshape the international trading system. The ambition of these measures is enormous. The effects on the global economy will be monumental. We received confirmation that the latest reciprocal tariffs will not be imposed on Canada.
Canada was not hit as hard as we were expecting. Yes, we still have steel and aluminum tariffs, there are some auto tariffs, and there have been layoffs. But this was not the cataclysmic moment we were expecting and, quite frankly, fearing. Now, the week also saw Carney face some tough questions about a candidate encouraging people to hand over a political rival to China, about his tax havens, about plagiarism, which we'll get to shortly. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, meanwhile, took criticism that he hasn't been sufficiently critical of Donald Trump head on, and in a speech in Toronto, addressed the American president.
We need a serious nation-building plan to Trump-proof our economy. Mine will put Canada first. It is a plan for Canada that is richer and stronger than the one the Liberals left us. A plan to protect Canada from whatever choices, wrong choices, the president might make. So my message to President Trump is this. If you keep attacking our economy, over the next 4 years, under my Conservative government, Canada will become completely rebuilt as an economy that no longer is reliant on the Americans for everything. You will have lost your greatest trading partner and best friend, We will be a confident and strong country capable of standing on its own 2 feet, standing up to anybody that gets in our way, and moving forward to give our people back the Canadian promise.
He also took on those critics who say that he should stop talking about other issues by, well, saying those issues like crime and affordability were causing pain in Canada before Trump and will continue to inflict pain unless they're addressed. This is a 2-horse race at the moment between Pierre Poilievre for the Conservatives and Mark Carney for the Liberals. And as I mentioned earlier, Stuart Thompson is traveling with one of those horses, and we caught up with Stuart in Montreal. So, Stuart, first week on the campaign trail. This is your first time out on a federal election leaders tour. What's the experience been like for you?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Brian, I was chained to my desk doing a live blog for the last 2 federal election campaigns, one for the National Post and one for the Hub. And this is a whole different beast. It really is something to get out there and see how these events actually come together and see how the leaders react to things that happen on the trail, whether it's, mean questions from journalists or just logistical issues or people asking them strange questions at meet and greets. It is just a side of these leaders that you wouldn't see otherwise. And talking to people, because they do these events and sometimes they grab 100, 200 people to be in the backdrop or just to be around. And not all of those people are going to give you talking points. They're going to give you actually their real opinion on what's going on, which is hard to get otherwise. So it's been really interesting.
Sometimes the leaders genuinely get applause from the people put behind them as the props to stand there in the background. Sometimes they genuinely like the leader. They like what they're saying. Other times they're weird or they don't. I don't know if you saw the video of a woman standing behind Jagmeet Singh in one of them, and she's eye-rolling as he's talking. Doug Ford in the last provincial campaign, he had a bunch of blue-collar workers standing behind them. One of them pulled out a sandwich and started eating it as Ford was talking. So you never know what's going to happen. But I'm happy you're on the campaign trail, and I'm mostly not. But we did meet up on last Monday in Woodbridge, north of Toronto. Mark Carney was at a carpenter's training center. I want to play the clip that you got to ask him a question about plagiarism, because this was a big story for National Post and very well documented, I thought, but he hadn't answered it directly. So here's your question and Mark Carney's answer.
Hi, Mr. Carney. It's Stuart Thompson from the National Post. On Friday, the Post published a piece revealing 10 instances of plagiarism in your doctoral thesis. Your party responded by attacking the academic who was quoted in the piece. Some of your surrogates mentioned pulling media subsidies because they didn't like the piece. First of all, did you plagiarize? And is this a demeanor we can expect from a Carney government? Will you attack the media when you don't like the work we do?
Thank you for your question. I'm pleased that there's such interest in my doctoral thesis. It's sort of languished on the shelf for over 3 decades. I think what you'll find in the middle of that piece is a very clear refutation of these, quote, allegations by senior-most academic at Oxford, Dr. Meyer, who was categorical in her rejection of many of the conclusions that you just made. So if your question is, does a professor at Oxford, well, I think the statement of Dr. Meyer stands is pretty obvious where it is, and as I say, I'm pleased that there is intense interest in a game theory thesis of 30-something years ago.
Now, we talked after that news conference before we both went on our separate ways, Stuart, but we didn't really talk about his reaction. I looked at it and I thought, well, as you were talking, he was smirking. People can't see that on, a podcast, but he was smirking. He was a little bit arrogant and condescending. And in my view of the end of that answer, when he started talking about, are you going to say a professor from Oxford? To me, it sounded like he was about to say, a professor from Oxford is better than, whatever Canadian you got to criticize me. And then he caught himself. Did you take it the same way?
Yeah, well, that's one of those moments as a journalist where it's agonizing when a leader catches themselves before they're about to say something, because what they were going to say was going to be news. And the reason they caught themselves is that it, would have been bad for them. So yeah, that was a tough moment for me because I felt like we would have had a better story if he'd kept going. But I actually, these things happen so fast as a journalist, and you're so worried about saying your question properly and, getting to the microphone and all that stuff, that it actually is hard to take it all in. And I hadn't actually noticed how annoyed he was until I watched the clip that you posted on Twitter. And I was like, wow, he really hated me in that moment. So that was one of those moments where, like, the thing about Carney that's different from all the other leaders is that he looks at you in the eye when you ask him a question and when he answers, which, talk to Tash Carradine about that. She'll tell you, don't do that. Don't refer to the journalists. Don't look at them. We have what they call a pool camera, which is the main feed for the broadcasters. Poilievre, Trudeau, they look directly into that camera. They don't even look at you as a journalist. And one of the things about Carney is he seems to take these questions a little more personally. He gets flustered. He gets a little annoyed by it. And in that moment, you could tell he was. And actually, this morning we were at Port of Montreal press conference, and Rafi Bouchikanian from CBC asked him a tough question on his French, and it was quite a moment. He didn't know quite how to take it. He got red. He kind of looked around and tried to laugh it off. But this is a guy who's not used to this stuff, and when you actually get to see it in person or be the guy who he's actually mad at, it's a whole different thing to see.
Yeah, I was standing off to the side while you were asking your question. I was just getting my own video to be able to post later, and so it is a very different thing. And you're right. When you're up there trying to ask a question, if you're going to be professional, you don't want to sound antagonistic. You just want to ask a straight up question, but one that will elicit the best answer. And the best answer is to get the most information out of the person. I guess some people, a lot of readers or viewers will think that we're out there to do gotcha stuff, and I guess some people are. But most of us are just trying to get the most information out of them we can. Judy Trinh, and I'm not picking on Judy Trinh here from CTV, she's been on the campaign trail with you this week. When the Paul Chang questions were being asked, she was the last one to ask, and she got really pointed. But that's because he wasn't answering. He was defending the candidate to the hilt. Now, look, that's rear view mirror stuff at this point. But were you surprised that was most of the questions in English that day were all about Paul Chang? I think other than yours about plagiarism, they were all about this candidate that had encouraged people to kidnap a political rival and hand him over to China. Were you surprised at how badly that was handled by the Liberal team? Because while Carney's in UB, the people around him, they've run successful election campaigns, 3 that got Justin Trudeau elected. You would think they would know better and look, this guy's creating news. He's got to go.
Yeah, it was really surprising that they did that. And it was actually the RCMP that made it happen when he resigned that night. And that, so like a little bit behind the scenes, we as journalists get 15 to 20 minutes with Carney every day. That really allows for only 4 or 5 questions. And what we do every morning is we huddle up and we decide who's going to ask which question. And so Judy actually, she was doing a live hit while we did the huddle, and I think she was just so frustrated by the responses that she just jumped into the question line and, and
really?
asked that. So that is just sometimes how these things go, is that the answers just weren't coming. And sometimes I get comments on Twitter saying you really need to make him answer this. And if a guy doesn't want to answer, he can not answer. All you can do is make him look silly for not answering with questions like that. And I think that is sometimes the ball game you have to play.
And look, my view is if I've asked someone a question and they deflect and won't answer, and you only have a certain amount of time, well, you're not going to keep asking that same question to make them give you the answer that you want. They're not going to give it to us. You ask again, maybe ask a third time. And if they keep deferring, as you say, the audience can take from that what they will.
Yeah. I'll just tell you, Brian, on that morning, we had Trump tariffs coming that week, and that was the question that we couldn't get in because we ran out of time. So I know that, you shouldn't complain about your job as a journalist, but those are the agonizing questions we have to, answer every time we do these press conferences because you have such a small amount of time. These politicians know how to ramble, so they're going to try and stretch them out. And sometimes you miss something.
Yeah. Each campaign has their own way of doing it. I've been out to both Carney's and Poilievre's campaign stops here in Toronto, and Carney, they say 15 minutes and they go through as many as they can, but then it's always English and French. And can you repeat that in the other language that you didn't answer in? And as you say, they know how to run out the clock. And so people will say one's not answering questions or the other's not. Poilievre gets, I think it's 4 questions each time. They used to do 4, now it's 5. Now it's down to 4. Look, they're trying to get their message out. They don't want to get our message out, and that's part of the game. What's your sense of Carney, though, after spending the week with him? Because you only get that 15 minutes or so a day to ask questions, but you do get to see him behind the scenes. He's not built to be a politician, I don't think, or he's not there yet. What's he like in those moments, if you get to see them, when he's at these, an event in a pub or meeting supporters? Is he comfortable? Is he awkward?
So I wrote a piece for the National Post from the campaign trail, and one of the things I talk about is how bad he is at this stuff, the kind of corny activities that they do at campaign events. And the way I described it is he's like a guy who's had his corporate board meeting interrupted for some cheesy icebreaker activities, and he's just going to grudgingly play along with it. And that's what he's doing. He's coming in, the event we were at, he had to use a table saw. He was supposed to push some wood into the table saw. It did not go well for him. He's gone to a pub and tried to interact with people, and that is a hard thing to do. I'm not great at it. Like, I was in Winnipeg on Tuesday circulating through a rally of Liberal supporters to get color for my piece. And, it's hard to mix into a crowd. Not everybody has that skill, but it is how you campaign. And one thing for Carney is that Justin Trudeau, say what you will about him, he could campaign, and he was good at it, and he loved it, and he was really good at mixing in with a crowd. And Trudeau, if you go on YouTube, you can watch a video of Trudeau at the same place we were at on Monday, Brian. And it is like night and day, the difference between the two men, because Trudeau's got his sleeves rolled up and he's chatting to everyone. And Carney just looks like a guy who's been, pulled out of the boardroom, and he's going to make it happen. And that's all he can really do.
Does he appear stronger, more in his element when he's doing that prime minister thing? I mean, they said on Wednesday, on Liberation Day, that he was suspending his campaign. And I thought that was a bit overly dramatic. He didn't need to suspend his campaign and go back to Ottawa for 2 days to respond to the tariffs. But to me, it feels like both he and his campaign team feel like he's more in his element, standing behind the podium on Parliament Hill in his role as prime minister than he is out campaigning. Does he appear stronger when you're in person? Because it is very different watching on TV or on YouTube than it is when you're standing 10 feet away from the person.
Yeah, so that was a minor disappointment for the journalists on the campaign plane, where we were supposed to go to Montreal on Tuesday night, and they said, sorry guys, call your families and tell them you're coming home to Ottawa. So they totally shut down, and they shut down to the extent that campaign staff don't know what's happening the next day because it has to be PMO. And a lot of that's just theater, but they are trying to do that. And I think they know implicitly this is great for Carney to come in, put his tie back on, and address the country as prime minister. And I went to his prime ministerial press conference on Thursday, and it is a different vibe. And I think that this is a man who likes being prime minister more than he likes trying to convince people to vote for him to be prime minister. And I think they know that's also a strength for them, is that when you have this big incumbent advantage that's brought on by Trump, I was talking to some conservatives who were saying the same thing. Like, to a certain extent, there's just this outsized incumbent advantage that we can't really do much about. And Carney's team, call it cynical or whatever, but they are going to maximize that to the full extent.
Oh, so that Thursday press conference where he responded to the tariffs from Trump, which mostly on what was announced Wednesday, we got a pass. I'm still waiting for other shoes to drop on digital services tax I'm not sure what Trump is going to do on the GST because that's a value-added tax, and he's taken a dislike to them. I hope that's just about the Europeans and not about us, but we will never know. So we mostly got a pass, and Carney still had to come out and, rah. We know that a big part of his campaign strategy is fear and loathing of Donald Trump and anxiety about tariffs. That has driven voters. We've seen it in the Leger polling for Post Media. You see it in polls like Abacus, where David Coletto is asking people about their anxiety. And everyone who's anxious, not everyone, but the majority of people who are anxious are going to Carney because of Trump. But he did something in that press conference that really annoyed me because, and I've written about it a couple of times now, he is a very casual liar. And that may be a strong word, but there's no other way to describe it. When he claims that he was proud to help Paul Martin balance the budget during the Liberal leadership debate. You didn't work at finance until 6 years after the budget was balanced. Oh, well, what I really meant was I had nothing to do with Brookfield moving to New York City other than the voting and the letter. But here's the clip of him saying that it was due to his work as Bank of Canada governor that Canada escaped a recession in 2008, 2009.
It is usually the case that when the United States has a recession, that it's very difficult for Canada to avoid something similar. There's been exceptions to that. With the financial crisis, 2008-9, when I was governor, we avoided a recession.
Okay, now, before I get your reaction to that, Stuart, here's Mark Carney in February 2009 before the House of Commons Finance Committee talking about the recession that we were in.
The global downturn and the declining demand for our exports will make this a very difficult year for Canada's economy. We're now in recession with GDP projected to fall by 1.2% this year.
I caught that right away. Theo Argytis, who's with the Hub now, he caught it. He used to work on the Hill with me. I think he was with Bloomberg back then. Brian Platt with Bloomberg was like, this is the second time he's claimed that we avoided a recession. What is this about? This attempt to take credit for things that he either didn't do or didn't happen. We were definitely in a recession in 2008, 2009, and it lasted almost a full year.
Yeah. Well, there's two bad possibilities here. One is that he wasn't paying attention so much that he didn't realize there was a recession as bank governor, or it is what I think it is just this kind of corporate resume bluster that I think it's a very specific thing that, you go into this private sector world, you claim credit for everything that was done anywhere near you in your career, and you just sort of act like, you're the best at every part of the job that you've done. And it is, at some points, it's just, we all tell the best story about ourselves in job interviews. But at some points, it is just clear lying. And we've pointed out a number of those instances. And he just seems to be a guy who's, not only is he so it's muscle memory to do this, but the scrutiny of it, we talked about this earlier, he just can't stand it. Like the idea that you would push back on some of these claims almost seems to offend him. And I think that just shows you the world that he's been in for so long, which is that he's had a lot of people kissing his butt for a long time. And when he says something, they don't push back, even if it's clearly false. And now politics is a different world because you have to deal with that.
Well, to go back to the story that you asked him about, if he's going to lie so casually about things like this, why wouldn't he have plagiarized? How is that far-fetched? How is it different? It's really not. I know you've been on the Carney campaign, but have the other campaigns broken through at all where you are? Because for folks that haven't done this, and I'm happy to have done it, happy to have seen the country, courtesy of election campaigns, happy I'm not on the plane. So you're just tunnel focused, you're in a bubble, and it's all about the guy you're following. But is Poilievre's speech or any of his announcements or Q&A portions, have they broken through? We'll ask you about Jagmeet Singh in a minute, but I don't think he's breaking through anywhere. But what about Poilievre? Does that pierce the bubble that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of questions. Like the big question to me, and I think to the journalists around us, is what do these rallies tell us? And, we're all looking at the polls, and the polls are showing a slight Liberal lead. But, I mean, we're looking at record-setting enthusiasm for Pierre Poilievre. And I've talked to some Tories who will tell you that, they're not sad that they're getting these big rallies, but they're trying not to take it too seriously because they don't want to get overconfident based on something that might be due to their just most hardcore fans coming out. But they do have a certain amount of optimism that these are unprecedented. 1,700 people in PEI, that's
half
crazy.
the island.
It's historical. Yes. So that is worth paying attention to, and it is worth
over
remembering
6,000 in
that,
Oshawa.
Yeah. And Pierre Poilievre, when he was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party, was attracting these big rallies, lots of enthusiasm, and it turned out to be a big indicator that people really liked him. And I think that is a big question for the Liberals. It's even a big question for the Tories who, they don't quite know how much they should look at this as a leading indicator for maybe polls going up in a week or two, or whether it's just their biggest fans coming out. And I think that is, if you're a Liberal, you're sort of watching all these things and wondering, are we safe? What more do we need to do?
Well, we've talked last week and, in the pages of the paper about the polling and how older voters and women anxious about Trump are going towards Carney. But I looked at the Stats Canada data, and there's just over 13 million Canadians over the age of 55. Now, don't know how many of them are voters. Some may be non-citizens, grannies that came over late, people that moved here, never took out citizenship. But there's 13 plus million in the 55 plus category. There's more than 19 million in the 18 to 54 category. Those are the voters that are, according to polling, still with Poilievre. So there is a chance for him to break this out. The polling wouldn't seem to indicate it, but the polls are also all over the place. So pollsters are not super confident at the moment. They're worried that they may be getting something wrong as well, because while there's a general trend, when you look at their demographic breakdowns or you look at their regional breakdowns, there's a lot of disparity between them. And that still tells you that the electorate is in flux.
Yeah, and I'm sure you get this too, but every pollster I talk to gives you a number of caveats about everything they're telling you, where they're just sort of leaving the door open in case something is wrong. And I think actually they are legitimately worried about these numbers are soft. The Liberal support is strong. The Liberal support is high, but it's not strong. So these are people who don't really know Carney, and maybe they could be shaky. And there's a lot of, turnout stuff that will really matter. The younger voters historically have not turned up, but they've historically not been as fired up as they are right now since maybe 2015. And I think that will certainly matter. And then the other thing is, you could definitely imagine this being an election once again where the Tories win the popular vote, but lose to the Liberals just because their vote is so concentrated in certain areas. And the Liberals, they just have this very efficient vote across the country that always helps them.
Yeah, so many factors at play still. Back to my mantra, voters are fickle, polls can change, campaigns matter. And we've still got
3 weeks to go. It's a long time.
got 3 weeks to go. Stuart, enjoy the campaign trail. Thanks for the time.
No, thanks, Brian.
When we come back, the other half of that Political Hack newsletter, Tasha Kierden, will join us. We'll talk about Pierre Poilievre a bit more, about how his campaign's going and what she thought of, the big speech and the special guest introducing Poilievre. More in moments.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
When a 24-year-old Pierre Poilievre first ran for Parliament in 2004, my father saw something in him. He believed in him. Believe it or not, my dad was one of Pierre's first donors to his first election campaign in Nepean, Carleton. And what he saw then is what Canadians see now. Someone with clarity, conviction, and a belief in Canada's potential.
Caroline Mulroney, Ontario's president of the Treasury Board, and of course the daughter of the late Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, introducing Pierre Poilievre at a speech last Wednesday in Toronto. It was not a pivot speech. They weren't changing direction, as some people have been saying the Conservatives need to do. But Pierre Poilievre did spend a lot of time talking about his plan for the future and linking things together, including how he would respond to President Trump if he's elected and becomes prime minister, but also a big emphasis on what he sees needs to happen in the Canadian economy and in Canadian society to deal with the issues that, well, predated Donald Trump. We'll play a clip of that in a moment. But Tasha Kieran joins us now, of course, the one half of the Political Hack newsletter and a columnist in her own right at the National Post. Tasha, your thoughts on Caroline Mulroney coming out for Pierre Poilievre? I've checked, despite what some people say, there was no edict to Doug Ford's cabinet to not get involved. So this was not her going off script from her boss, but she did want to go out on her own personally and do that and highlight the connection between her dad and Pierre Poilievre. Did it surprise you? Did you like it? What did you make of it?
So I thought it was very interesting. I think even if there was no edict, or we assume there is an edict, Caroline Mulroney has no reason to respect an edict. You don't tell Caroline Mulroney what to do. She has been elected 3 times. She comes from a totally pedigreed political family. She's been steeped in it since she's a child. And the legacy of her father alone, I think, insulates her from anyone trying to say what, to tell her who she can or can't support or campaign for or whatnot. So I saw that. I thought my first reaction was good on you. I think what's interesting about it too is that she described Pierre Poilievre as my friend. She did talk about her father's association with him. And I know that her father had met with him, had dinner with him, had gone to Stornoway and met with both. In fact, him and Mila had met with Pierre and his wife, Anna, to talk about, being a leader of a conservative party. This was early on in after he was elected. So there's definitely truth to that relationship. I think the signal she was sending was designed to mitigate some of the bleeding of the center-right vote that you're seeing in Ontario to the Liberals. Her father incarnated progressive conservatism, and I would say Caroline probably does too. The Ford conservatives, progressive conservatives, are still called that in Ontario, progressive conservatives. Doug Ford himself has, as his government spends a lot of money, it does a lot of things, it's pretty activist, you would say. It is not a small government conservative party by any means. So I think that what she was doing was telegraphing to red Tories and people who might have liked her father, saying, hey, it's okay to vote conservative federally. Don't go to the Liberals. If you can be comfortable in this party. I am too. So that was what I took away from her remarks and her endorsement of Pierre Poilievre.
Did you catch much of the speech? I was in the room. It was a very, they basically called in all the high-level conservatives they could find and say, come on out for breakfast. So it was a friendly room. It wasn't a rally. It was staged kind of like an Empire Club thing, one of these rubber chicken things, but done at breakfast. And it got a good reception. And so, I'm standing at the back with the other journalists watching. It was in my view, a well-delivered speech. I thought some good content in it as well. What were your thoughts?
I didn't see the entire thing. I was not invited to take part in the rubber breakfast, so I would have probably gone if it had worked for me, because I think that there haven't been, aside from rallies, which are the large partisan events in the GTA. For campaigns, it's really, more local, hyper local stuff that's happening. And it would have been interesting to see the reaction. I did see some excerpts from her speech and from Pierre's speech. And I think that the emphasis on the sort of forward-looking stuff is important, because this is what a lot of people are looking at. They don't like the record of the Liberals. That is clear. I think that, you ask anyone on the street, do you want 9 more years of this? Most people will say no, but that's not the ballot question. So going forward and talking more forward looking, I thought was a smart move. It's what is going to, if anything, I think, catch people's imagination or give them the comfort to be a conservative and support, because the sense is, well, the Liberals, Carney's got a plan. What's your plan, Pierre? So I think that was important.
I liked his line. He claims Mark Carney doesn't have a plan, and I liked his line, a good catchy one, where he said, "What is his plan? A resume is not a plan."
That was a good line. There were some good lines like that, and I think that goes to the point that again, it's we're in a new era. We're in a very strange world, and this was done even before the tariffs dropped, right? That event. The tariffs are now with us, and we have a sense of great unknown. Markets are dropping like stones. People are losing their retirement savings. Like that piece alone is a very big issue people aren't really talking about as much. But, I have friends in the US too who are saying their 401k is like decimated, and they're really unhappy. They weren't Trump supporters to begin with, but they're saying this is now, they're hearing from their Trump friends like, oh my God, we didn't sign on for this.
Yeah, people are watching the kids' college fund go down, their retirement savings go down. I mean, the good news for Canada is, and I talked to provincial governments about this and talked to people in industry, it's like, okay, we were expecting to get hit harder. And Carney even acknowledged that. We played that clip off the top. So spared a little bit. And I wonder if that is part of the Trump team hearing folks like Ben Shapiro saying, hey, buddy, you're going to reelect the Liberals if you keep hitting Canada hard. You wanted rid of Justin Trudeau. Do you want to reelect Justin Trudeau 2.0?
I think Trump cares. I really think people make way too much. I honestly don't think he cares who's in the chair.
Well,
here.
he clearly hated Trudeau.
I think his thing
I don't think he wants. I don't think he cares who's in the chair
Trudeau,
after Trudeau, but he hated Justin Trudeau.
You notice the 51st state talk has gone away. Where is that? We don't hear it anymore since he talked to Mark Carney. Since he talked to Carney, it's gone. So I think one of the things here that I think really did motivate Trump is his own base, and also the fact there was basically a revolt within his own party on the bill, or the motion rather, that was passed in Congress, in the Senate, saying that don't levy more tariffs on Canada. In fact, take them off. Like that, the fact that the Republicans broke rank on that is a sign to him that even people who, he would have thought would have fallen in line are not quite as terrified of him as they were maybe a month ago. And that is a problem for him. We're also hearing that Elon Musk is no longer going to be floating around as of May, or maybe earlier, because there's a sense that maybe he's overstepped too. So I think Trump is looking at this and going, okay, maybe we'll leave Canada alone for now. We'll focus on the rest of the globe. And the real agenda, the underlying agenda with Trump, which really I do believe is China, and squeezing China, prying Russia away from China, imposing massive tariffs on China, and China also imposing tariffs on Vietnam and Cambodia, all the areas around, like the whole, Walmart manufacturing base.
But that's the part of his tariff plan that I can get on board with, because when you look at the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers that these countries impose on the United States or on Canada, and we're still part of Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're supposed to have better access. These countries are actually horrible on trade. We're not, and we were getting hit. So,
but think of what we buy from them, what they buy from us. Do we? This is the irony here. Again, is the goal here to repatriate all the manufacturing of sweatshop goods from Vietnam, Cambodia, and China into the U.S. and give people jobs on the line making T-shirts, which then Americans won't be able to buy because the minimum wage is too high and they'll be too expensive. Like, it's bizarre. Trump, I understand he wants to onshore industries, but some of the industries he wants to onshore, like, garment manufacturing, how does that work? Is that, the reason it moved overseas is because of cheap labor. So unless he's going to depress wages and make things more affordable, Americans are going to get angry because they're like, well, now I can't buy that T-shirt. And maybe there's too much fast fashion. I don't know, but do they want to work, 12 hours a day making T-shirts like people do overseas? To me, I don't get it. There's some industries like semiconductor, high tech stuff. I get it. Repatriate that stuff. There's a security component to that as well. But there's none to a lot of the consumer stuff that people buy that will now become radically more expensive.
I don't think he's looking to bring over T-shirt manufacturing. I think it's on a different scale. But let's just go back to another clip of Pierre Poilievre from that speech, because last week we spoke a lot about Corey Teneycke and him, putting a shot across the bow of the Poilievre campaign and saying, you should be focused just on this. Here is Poilievre's response, not exactly a shot back at Corey tonight, but here's why I'm doing it.
Some Liberal supporters and lobbyists have asked why I keep talking about the cost of living, housing, crime, and about the Liberal drug crisis instead of focusing exclusively on Donald Trump. My answer is this. The threat of the President's actions against Canada are serious, and I've proposed serious answers to those threats. But the struggles that Canadians are facing at home, the fear and the hurt that I hear everywhere across this land, those are real too. And I will not stop talking about these problems which predate Donald Trump and which will outlast Donald Trump if we do not act to fix them. Everyone is struggling with the cost of living. Young Canadians are stressed about never affording a home, bills they can't afford.
So, Tasha, that was part of his main goal, was to not only say, look, I am being tough on Trump, and here's what I'm going to do. Do you think that works? I mean, when I'm talking to people that are out knocking on the doors in suburbs for the Conservatives, I say, well, what are you getting? And they say, Trump comes up, but we're also hearing about housing affordability, or out in Ajax. Talked to one guy that was out door knocking with Greg Brady, and he said, crime is a huge issue in Ajax. So was that a fail or a good move? Are the tariffs not going to be the dominant issue they were in the first week and a half?
There's a possibility they will be less, because now, like we said earlier, that Canada is not facing new escalated tariffs. They will be a big deal, though, in terms of the auto sector, which is a big bad story for Ontario. And so people are going to feel it here. You know, with Stellantis plants shutting down for a couple weeks. So I think it's kind of a regional thing, to be honest. I've heard from friends who are campaigning and door knocking in Nova Scotia, for example, that everywhere they go, the issue is tariffs, Trump. People either love or hate Pierre Poilievre. In fact, the older cohorts, interesting, as our colleague Stuart Thompson wrote about in his excellent piece in the National Post this week, older Canadians tend to be on the side of the Liberals, saying, Poilievre doesn't have what it takes to counter Trump. That is the big issue. And they're looking to protect exactly what we were also talking about, their retirement savings, things they have. Younger families that my friend was door knocking said they were supportive of Poilievre because they're like, you know what? I want to get those things and I can't right now. And like you said, tariffs aren't the number one thing. Cost of living is groceries, food, the future of my kid, getting a house, all those things. So I think this election will be very generational. It will also be very regional because Atlantic Canada, for example, much older population demographically. You move over to Ontario, and you may have younger families out in areas like Milton and suburbs or the exurbs of Toronto, those kinds of places where they'd be like, hey, you know what? The tariffs are one thing, but the other issues are on the table and they are eternal issues.
So we've talked a lot last week and this week about the idea of older voters going to the Liberals. Younger voters are still with Poilievre, and that shows up in the polling. And we all know that older voters are more likely to show up, right? So it just did the numbers based off of Stats Canada population by age cohort. They divided up by 5-year age cohorts. And there's roughly 19 million people aged 18 to 54. And the 55 plus crowd, which is where they're all going to Carney, that's 13 million.
Yep.
That surprised me. But I guess it makes sense. The older boomers are passing on. We've all lost loved ones who would have been part of that cohort. So there's a big opportunity there. David Coletto from Abacus Data did some interesting number crunching this week. He still has the Liberals and Conservatives tied, at least the latest horse race poll that I saw. Most, like Leger, which does our polling, has the Liberals with like a 6-point lead. But when Coletto asked people who did not vote in 2021 where they're leaning, it was 40% for the Conservatives, 31% for the Liberals, 13% for the NDP. That's their best showing in any poll. But when he asked these same people who, are you certain to vote, it became 46% for the Conservatives, 34% for the Liberals, and 11% for the NDP. I'm not doubting the polls because I've spent my lifetime working with these guys, but I do know that they're nervous. I talked about that with Stuart earlier. I do know that they're nervous because there is so much fluidity in the electorate, which we've seen. There isn't a real possibility for the Conservatives to pull this off if they can motivate those younger voters to actually show up.
So I think that is an interesting observation, because what we are also seeing is those big rallies that the Conservatives are having. Their base is very motivated. No question. If you're a hard motivated Conservative, you are motivated. So likely, if you're motivated, you would think you will get yourself to the polls, to your point. So if they motivate their base, or they take their motivated base and they have a ground game that's sufficient to make sure that they track people and everything else, these people should, in theory, get themselves to the polls, because they are angry. They have a reason. They want change, and they want this change. The Liberal vote could be softer for exactly that reason. People are scared. People want to protect their stuff. But as you pointed out, in fact, there was a flip a year or two ago of the boomers of actually being smaller as a cohort, because they're starting to die off, than the cohorts beneath them, the millennials.
I'm Gen X. We're the smallest generation, and nobody cares about us.
We don't. We're little. We're a little generation. We're sandwiched in there, but it was the millennials that were bigger. So for the first time, there was that inversion, and you mentioned the numbers, but you're including Gen Zs now in that too. So it is a bit of a watershed. And so you've got the very nervous, I'll call them the nervous boomers, and the angry millennials. That's like divide. That's the people who are fighting each other. So who's going to show up? To your point, I think the traditional thinking is older voters more, but in this election they may be a little less motivated, because, like you said, the tariffs things are maybe calming down a bit. It depends. Really, this is an unpredictable election because you don't know what Donald Trump, who's the main driver of that boomer anxiety, is going to do. If he does some radical, crazy things, the boomer anxiety goes way up and they get to the polls, right? So
yeah, let me check True Social, see if he's done anything crazy while we've been talking. But
that's just it. Every morning you check, because he posts at 4 a.m, for God's sakes. I'm not up at that hour. I check at 6:30. I'm like, what's going on? And there's something there half the time. That's what you can't control.
He has not posted about Canada in the past while.
I know. Forgotten
it has really messed up my morning as a journalist. It used to be get up, check the itineraries of the because I cover all levels of politics.
Yeah, you get all the leaders, you get all the
you're like, okay, where's the PM at? Where are they campaigning? What's the premier doing? What's the mayor doing? No, now it's what's on Truth Social. Okay. Nothing. Let's talk just quickly about Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. We could talk about the Bloc Québécois cratering in Quebec, but I don't think our audience is overly infatuated with Quebec.
But I'm a Quebecoise. I care.
What's driving that?
Okay, so let me say something here. So what's driving that is the same phenomenon. Quebec's also old demographically. Quebec's an old province. And demographically also, and this is important for the rest of the country, because Quebec can determine a majority or minority government. We all know this. And Quebec tends to look at the rest of the country and go, what are they doing? And if they think a winner is happening in Ontario, we'll go there. So it's very important.
In 2015, they're the province that picked the winner, and the rest of the country followed behind in Justin Trudeau.
Well, in 2015, Justin Trudeau, who is a Quebecer, he's born in Ottawa, but he's, Trudeau Senior, Montreal, like there's a history there. Quebecers tend to vote for their own people, right? Right now, they've got no horse in this race. There's no Quebecer on the ballot. So that opens things up in a way, except for Yves-François Blanchet, who's the eternal Quebecer on the ballot, right? He's like Mr. Quebec, and that's his only issue. So if your only issue is Quebec and you're worried about supply management at the bargaining table for future negotiations of CUSMA, okay, that's his argument. You should vote for me. Not everyone's thinking that far, right? They're like, I can't pay my rent. I can't pay this. I can't pay that. Who's going to keep Canada together so that Quebec doesn't end up like this island, unable with terrible economic prospects? That's the thinking now. So that's why a lot of people are fleeing the traditional parking lot that the Bloc has been, it's safe to vote Bloc. It doesn't matter. Well, this election matters, because if Canada goes belly up, bad news for Quebec. So that's the logic here. I will tell you, though, there was a program this week, 5 leaders, 1 election, and Mark Carney's French was pretty terrible. everyone agreed on that. Pierre Poilievre gave very good answers in a decent French. Blanchet was, of course, great. But the point is that these kinds of touchstones could make a difference in Quebec. Shows like that, the French debate, Quebecers are watching. And I think that for the Liberals, that is a bit of a difficult spot for them because there's things like language laws, stuff that people don't in the rest of the country care about. But we do in Quebec. We do.
I was out in with Carney last week. I always watch his news conferences, but I was actually out at one. And the French questions were all dominating. What are you going to do about the court challenge to our language
Bill
laws?
96. Yeah. And 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
And so Poilievre has said he will not get involved. He won't back a court challenge. Now that will anger the English community in Quebec. But guess what? They don't vote for him anyway.
Exactly.
I have watched Anglo-Quebecers, especially Montreal, line up and vote for the Liberals as the Liberals are attacking language rights. And they're still like, yep, there are people.
Montreal has been a fortress Liberal, with the exception, of course, of that riding in Verdun, St. Paul, that the by-election that flipped, that by-election, that was interesting. So it left the camp that it was supposed to be in. I think what's going to happen here, though, is who is going to profit from that argument, that debate? Are the Conservatives going to profit sufficiently from Carney's decision to challenge Bill 96 to the point where they could win seats? Or will it just allow the Bloc to come up? I think it's more the latter. I think the Bloc will come up, right?
A couple quick points on Jagmeet Singh. A couple quick thoughts there.
Okay, we must
we're
talk
over
about
time.
Jagmeet
So
Singh.
yeah,
I know what I want to talk about in Jagmeet Singh, but you go first.
no. I mean, I think he's found his niche in campaigning with OnlyFans content creators who wear keffiyehs and hate Israel. Oh,
that was special. I did not have that on my bingo card for 2025.
And the guys who wear dog masks for their fetish. He campaigned with a couple of them as well.
I missed that. How did I miss that? I got the OnlyFans, though. I woke up to that one. That was, I don't know, 2 days. I don't know when that was, but I was like, really? That was my morning feed. I'm looking at this going, oh, I've never spent more time on OnlyFans, Brian, than I did that day because I just had to see what this was about. And yeah, it was an odd choice. And this individual had apparently bumped into him in an elevator, I read later, like in the last campaign in 2021. And so he approached her again, or she approached him. I'm not sure how that happened, but he I don't know where his campaign manager was in this. You do not allow the candidate to make these choices.
Well, also rapidly
work with her. What is that?
Rapidly anti-Israel. But then again,
yes,
the whole NDP caucus or in campaign, they've all signed the Palestine Declaration. So
perhaps they're at McGill making noise right now. I don't know, but the thing with
they're falling apart in BC and Ontario, where in BC they have at times been well above 20% in BC. It's been a 3-horse race often. They've just down to single digits everywhere.
Well, I think this is what we were discussing earlier with our producer, because I was saying that the NDP has really picked, and the left in general have picked issues that are not mainstream issues for most people, and that also can get people upset in the mainstream, including the issue of Palestine, Gaza, Israel, and the conflict there with Hamas. Because for most people, this is something that they may have an opinion on, but it is not their front burner question. And to be confronted consistently with this as the most important issue whenever they go to the mall or whenever they walk down the street and there's a protest and the NDP is there capitalizing on this and saying this is our issue, they're like, well, but what about protection for workers and minimum wage and union issues and stuff the NDP used to stand for? Where is that? Why is this secondary to Gaza? We're not in Gaza. And I think that the obsession the left has with issues that are very important to certain constituencies, right, but that don't really resonate with most people on a daily basis, have made people feel disconnected from the left, disconnected from Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. Like, what? Why are you preoccupied with this?
And so you see Pierre Poilievre, and we'll see if this ends up helping. He gets endorsed by the Boilermakers across the country, which is big in Ontario and Alberta, especially Quebec as well. He gets endorsed by the pipe fitters in Hamilton, the Carpenters Union that represents workers. I'm not sure if it's all across Atlantic Canada or just New Brunswick, but he got endorsed by them. I'm told there's going to be several more endorsements to come. There were a bunch of union reps at that Wednesday morning speech in Toronto. And I talked to some of them and I said, well, are you endorsing like the firefighters? And said, no, but we're here to listen. We're taking part. So, interesting that they're losing that. Unfortunately for Poilievre, it looks like most of the NDP support has gone to Carney, but we'll monitor that. Maybe we'll talk about that more again next week. Tasha, thanks so much for the chat today, and continue reading Tasha in National Post.
Thanks.
Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libben is the executive producer. Remember, you can subscribe to Full Comment on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google, Spotify, wherever you get them. Hit the subscribe button. Help us out by giving us a rating or leaving a review, and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. By the late 1960s, you have members of the Montreal Police who can spend their entire shift rushing from one FLQ bombing to another. Here's how New Year's Eve 1968 played out for Robert Cote, a member of the Montreal Police bomb squad, which put him at the forefront of fighting the FLQ during this period. He was supposed to be at home with his wife, who had just miscarried twin daughters. But instead, at 11 p.m., he's called out to Montreal City Hall to investigate a bomb that had just gone off. He's en route with sirens blaring when he's told, actually, don't bother with the exploded bomb. There's an unexploded bomb on the other side of City Hall you have to defuse. And then, right after snipping the wires on the City Hall bomb, Cote has to speed west, where a third bomb has just exploded outside a federal building.
The bombing started in April and May of 1963. That's when the first bombings took place. And the mailbox bombings were the most famous part of the whole thing, which was basically on the Thursday night and Friday night leading into the Victoria Day weekend in 1963. So, and initially they started attacking these symbols of federalism, federal institutions, whether it was the Montreal Post Office or a Revenue Canada. But the bombings escalated as time went on in terms of the size of the bombs and the powerfulness of these bombs.
If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.